Hello, I'm Nicholas Eldred. I'm an experienced General Counsel and Company Secretary. I perform those roles at O2, the BBC and Christie's, and these days I run my own legal consultancy.
Hello, I'm Vanessa Cowling. I work for Venture Founders, where I'm the Head of Legal, Compliance and Risk.
Hi, I'm Chris Fox. I'm Chief Legal Officer at Canby.
Hi, I'm Grace Etchers. I'm a trainee solicitor at Canby, and these are our top tips of how to make a board meeting go smoothly. Can anyone tell me sort of how they find themselves within a board meeting and what role they take within that?
So I think the lawyer can be in the meeting because they're part of the board and they've got responsibilities to protect shareholder interests and take a strategic approach to the business. Or they can be in the meeting because they're part of the executive team or part of senior management, and they may be opining or providing advice or guidance on a specific area. So, for example, I think most of us have probably presented to the board on topics such as GDPR, or in some instances where intellectual property gets to prominence at a board level. So I think it's interesting to think about those two different differences.
Well, I completely agree with that. And if you think also, the lawyer can be lawyer, company secretary, risk management, they might have the insurance portfolio, they might be dealing with compliance, they might be doing the whole range of things. That person is very useful to have in the room because they can answer points on a range of things, not just legal advice. So if you can have the lawyer in the room from the beginning and be part of that infrastructure, so much the better as far as I'm concerned.
I've also found that the lawyer is also quite a good person to facilitate discussion, debate within the boardroom. So you remind directors of their duties and responsibilities, you encourage debate so that topics are properly considered and the board make informed decisions about whatever they're considering at that point.
Has there ever been a circumstance where you found yourself having multiple hats on within a board meeting, and has that posed any particular challenges for you?
Yes is the answer to that. I mean, if you think you are a trusted officer of the company, board directors will be looking to you for cogent and clear advice and reliant on you. But also you can often be part of the management team and you're sitting there as perhaps part of the management group. And the management group are relying on you as well to interact properly with the directors. And what that brings about is a tremendous need to always remember that you're representing the company. And you always have to do what is right for the company. Not necessarily what's right for the CEO or the chair or the particular board director, but you are representing the company as a whole. And when you get that right, you get effectively your authority, and people understand what your role is. So you don't necessarily agree with everybody in the room. That's not your job. Your job there is to advise the company. I
completely agree, and I think the general counsel in the room probably has the most hats on because they are representing the company. They may be part of the board and have responsibilities attached to being part of that element of the business. They may also be part of the management team. As well as being an officer of the company, they're an officer of the court, and they have to protect the company from the perspective of ethics and integrity. And I think there's also been quite a lot of discourse recently on executives being a member of the business first, or a member of the business and also someone that is skilled in a specific area. So you've also got to wear the hat of protecting the business from legal risk, but also managing the commercial and business and strategic objectives. So it's lots and lots of hats.
I found in my role, because as head of compliance, I also have a duty to the regulator as well. I have an oversight and making sure the company is complying with rules. So there is a impartiality that I'm supposed to protect as well. It's interesting sort of about different hats and the conflict as well. Sometimes you have that your executive team wants to present something and get something approved, a project, a contract, a deal, whatever it is. And the board look to you to see whether that's the right thing for the company. But obviously there's that conflict because you've got to advise the board, and that might not be exactly what that project or that deal requires.
I've been in a position as a GC in the past where I have been part of an affected demographic based upon decisions taken at either a board or an executive level, but where I have also had to provide advice as a GC to protect the company from the impact of the decisions it's made. So I'm both affected by their decision, but also need to ensure that I protect the company from legal risk in terms of how they're making that decision, advise them if they've got additional risks attached to the approach they've taken. So that's one scenario where you've got two hats on. Second scenario, been in a position where the CEO of a business I worked for and the board are not necessarily aligned, and you've got to tread very carefully in terms of
get caught in the middle.
Exactly. So you've got reporting line, but you've also got to manage your responsibilities to the board effectively.
I often sum this up in my own mind as you can be everybody's friend, but you can also be nobody's friend.
How can you get the most out of both your board papers and your minutes for a board meeting?
My prime point on this is you have to remember why you're there. You're there for approval, you're there to inform the board, why are you there? And that should be reflected in your board papers. What I found most effective in senior management when they've prepared board papers is that they tell a story, and hopefully that story leads the board to wherever they want to lead them, basically. So do you want approval for this M&A transaction? Why? What are the pros and cons, and why do you think, as executive of the team, of the company, sorry, that this is the right thing for the company to do? What the board don't want is just a set of plain facts or figures, and then they have to join up the dots and try and work out what the best way forward is. I
have to say I completely agree with that. I think the lawyer and the team putting papers together needs to make sure the document is as clear and concise and as easily readable and digestible by non-lawyers as possible. So a clear, concise summary in the paper of what the legal issues are, what some of the trade-offs might be, what some of the risks are, and so on, I think is important. But also for those directors who are interested in knowing more detail about the advice, perhaps put it in an annex if you've got external advice, so they can read it and understand it in a privileged annex. All that should help you then, when you get to that boardroom, have directors who have a better understanding of the issues and therefore more able to debate the points with you and come to a reasonable conclusion.
How can you help guide the board into making these important decisions?
One thing I found invariably works is to talk to people ahead of a meeting. So just make sure, first of all, that the management team is fully aware of the legal advice and the nuances and the issues. So they come in, if you like, pre-briefed, they've got the points, they understand some of the issues that are being raised by the advice, point one. Point two, do the same with boards, particularly the chair, because you want the chair to understand the legal issues and give the chair and others space to ask sort of first base questions so that they kind of get the point. So when you come into the meeting, everybody is pretty much appraised of what the issues are, and then you go into Q's and A's and you're debating the kind of points that arise. And you're debating, hopefully at a level of sort of maturity of understanding of the issues. And then you're more likely to get a better decision, because people aren't just coming at it thinking, what is the advice? It looks all right, we've got such and such law firm that says it's all right. They've actually done a bit more legwork, and some of the work, they understand the points, and they are debating the advice and where to go at a higher level, hopefully. Just
to reiterate, I think it's a very good idea to speak to people beforehand, because then you get to really understand what the concerns are, what people's triggers are, what they want to get out of it, so that when you come into the board meeting there aren't any surprises. You can preempt the questions, preempt the discussions and debates, and you as the lawyer in the room can be prepared. And if I can make another point, it's not a one-way communication, this. So you can go to the lawyer and talk to the directors, but actually the directors might come up with one or two perspectives that you haven't at that time taken into account. So you can go and get more rounded advice in a particular area, and it might affect the tentative conclusion, it might not. But nevertheless, you've got the experience of these board directors who can come in with points and say, actually, I need to weave that into my advice and deal with it.
I think that's a really important point, because the reason why you want your board papers to be concise, well-structured, communicative, telling a story, making the points that you want to make in an articulate way, perhaps supported by annexures, and also why you want to meet with people in advance of the meeting is so that you can encourage fulsome debate. And the reason for that is that board meetings people tend to have a limited amount of time to discuss all of the issues that they've got to cover off. And in addition, you need to respect the fact that the board are experts in their field and are highly educated and are very able to perform the functions of the board, but they're often time poor. If they're not executives as well, if they're not operational in addition to being board members, then they're not going to necessarily be as familiar with all of the intricacies of the company. So you need to tell that story with concision, and you need to tell that story effectively so that they can discharge their duties properly.
when you are within a board meeting, how can you add value? I know we talked about the many hats before, but sort of to expand upon that point, how can you really make sure that you're adding value within that meeting?
We're post now the proper briefings, we're post all the pre-conversations, we're in the board meeting. I think that being dynamic and being responsive to the points that directors raise is really important. You may unfortunately be in some positions where board directors are almost reading the papers on the fly, but they may raise some brilliant points, and I think being prepared to be flexible and dynamic is really valuable.
If you're in the room taking the minutes, it's quite hard to participate as well. So if there is another minute taker, so much the better. And if, whilst you're there, using your eyes and ears just to see how things are going, points needing to be raised, perhaps having a quick word with the chair or the chief executive or somebody about a point that seems to be going off script a bit or off beam or whatever, and bringing it back to the focus. I think the other thing that good lawyers can do is help the chair of the meeting summarise points that are made so that people understand. I mean, a number of times where directors and others have come out of meetings with different takeouts as to what's been agreed, help the board summarise what has been agreed in a pretty nice, concise way, I think pays dividends. Use
and abuse your skill set as a lawyer. You know, you're a negotiator, you're a wordsmith. You know, when you're in that room and you know, board discussions can get quite emotive, can get quite heated. You mentioned that, you know, the agendas can be quite full, it can be quite late at night. I've done my fair share of board meetings, you know, early hours of the morning. Use your personal skills, you know, facilitate conversations, get people to calm down, get people to summarise the points, and then hopefully, you know, you use the time as best as you can do.
I think sort of tying everything together, we've got someone with multiple hats on that might be an executive and a board member, company secretary, officer of the court, officer of the company. They've got responsibilities to lots of different stakeholders in that room, responsibilities to the chair, responsibilities to the CEO, the CFO, etc. I think using your emotional intelligence to understand the direction of the board meeting and then to have those side conversations to try to facilitate the meeting and try to ensure that everyone's views are properly reflected is critical. So I think use of your emotional intelligence is really important.
Absolutely.
I think it would be great if we could wrap up by saying our #1 top tip.
My #1 top tip would be to make sure you're clear on the ask, to make sure everyone in that room knows what is being requested of the board.
My top tip would be to tell a story. Make sure the board understand what you're trying to get from them and help them along the way to make the right decision.
And my top tip would be to be dynamic and flexible in the meeting and try always to provide advice and guidance in that meeting as opposed to taking it away outside of the boardroom.
And thank you for watching.